Currently, settlement for a transaction on Solana is about 400 milliseconds, but there's another new technology being built which will reduce that to about 150 milliseconds. And the reason that is so important is 200 milliseconds is the point at which a human feels something is generally instantaneous. Since the first Solana ETFs went live a few weeks ago, they have seen inflows every single trading day since. And I think it really shows the demand and interest in Solana, which is really exciting to see.
Why did you pick Solana, as a place to go work? There's a lot of blockchain projects out there.
Solana is the fastest, cheapest, most scalable layer 1 blockchain.
This episode is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great crypto platform that makes it easy to buy, sell, and stake crypto assets. Uphold has over 300 plus cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin and all the top altcoins, and they offer crypto staking on over 19 crypto assets. I've been a user of the platform for many years. They are safe and reliable. They don't commingle or lend out your crypto funds, and they are 100% reserved. You can review their transparency report. Uphold also offers an amazing rewards program where you can earn up to 5.25% on stablecoins. This rewards program also allows you to get 24-hour early access to new tokens that they list. And to participate, you just simply have to open the app once per month, deposit $50 once per month, and trade $50 once per month. And the stablecoins that they support includes Ripple's RLUSD. You can earn up to 5% on that stablecoin and 5.25% on USBC. So if you'd like to learn more about Uphold and all the great services they offer, visit the link in the description. Hey folks, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and joining me today is Nick Ducoff, who is the head of institutional growth at the Solana Foundation. Nick, great to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, Nick, I am excited to dive into the latest and greatest around Solana. Lots happening in the Solana ecosystem, but I would love to kick it off with your background. Tell us a bit about yourself, where you're from, and your professional background.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me on the podcast. Really excited to join you today. My name is Nick Ducoff. I lead institutional growth at the Solana Foundation. I joined the Solana Foundation in the summer of 2023, so about 6 months after FTX, which was a really interesting time to join Solana, and it's incredible to see how far the ecosystem has come since then. Prior to joining Solana, I was a venture capitalist working at a generalist fund leading crypto investments. And prior to that, I had a couple careers, but I started my career as a securities lawyer working on deals like the MySpace acquisition by Fox. I then left the practice in 2010 to take a shot at entrepreneurship and was very fortunate that I had a couple modest successes. I started a company with some guys in 2010, and we sold it in 2014. And then I did another one in 2017 that we sold in 2021. And I have been interested in crypto since the early 2010s. The co-founders of my first company were actually big Bitcoiners. They went on to start a company called Unchained Capital, which is multi-sig custody for Bitcoin. And that's what really sent me down the rabbit hole. And then another friend of mine here in Boston, which is where I live now, started a company called Flipside Crypto in 2017. And that's what really got me interested in the alt chains. And then I also, in between Bitcoin and alts, was exposed to Ethereum during the mint. I was sitting next to a friend when he bought Ethereum in the auction, and I'll never forget it because I recall it. The price went up every some period of time. I don't remember. You had to have Bitcoin, obviously, to buy ETH in the auction, and I had Bitcoin and everything, and the price had just doubled when I met up with him at his apartment, and I was like, I missed the low price, and this was like, I don't know, pennies in an Ethereum token, but it's incredible to see how the industry has come along from there.
Yeah, amazing journey, Nick. As a founder, then you exited those companies and sold them and so forth, and coming across crypto. Um, how did you end up why did you pick Solana, as a place to go work? There's a lot of blockchain projects out there. Maybe you can tell us a bit about, for the newcomers who are maybe watching and listening to this, what is Solana and why is it better than the others?
Yeah, so Solana is the fastest, cheapest, most scalable layer 1 blockchain. And with the best ecosystem too. I think that's really, really important. It was really clear to me when I was in venture capital that the ecosystem that Solana had been building, and it was still very early. This is like 2021, 2022, was really sticky. And the people that were building the Solana ecosystem were there because they really firmly believed that it was the best technology and that they had the best approach to scalability. Of course, scalability on Solana is at the layer one. There's no fragmentation of liquidity, and that is really a key part of the Solana thesis, which is all assets, same chain, global market participants, 24/7. And I think we even saw that, today with the launch of Monad tokens on the Solana network at the same time as they were live everywhere else. And some people may say, well, isn't that's kind of weird? Monad is an EVM chain, and the idea though is that Solana has been very consistent, from its inception, which is all assets, one chain, single liquidity venue, global market participants, 24/7. All assets mean all assets. And it was just really clear to me that the people building on Solana were there because they really believed in technology, really believed in what Tolly Rush and the founders had built. And then as a user, if you had ever used any blockchain, in the 2021, 22 timeframe, and then you use Solana, you're just like, this is wicked fast. This is incredible. It's incredibly fast. It's incredibly cheap. The UX is just so good. And it's funny, like, didn't, in my opinion, take a genius to see that. But Solana has always been the underdog. Even then, when it was so clear, at least to me, that Solana was building something that was really durable. I had friends asking me, you're going to the Solana Foundation, and this again was summer of 23, and FTX had happened 6 months ago, but it's incredible the people that came before me, and there were many people that were building on Solana much before I joined the foundation. And boy, do I give them a lot of credit because they really got it. And I'm just so glad that they exposed me to it. Because it's an incredible platform. It's an incredible ecosystem. It's an incredible place to build.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember years ago, Nick, I was testing Solana, looking to build like a social token. It had no value to it. And it was so fast and so easy. So I can certainly attest to that. So Nick, you mentioned, it's well, layer one, and you have this ecosystem. You got retail participants, people doing NFTs, meme coins, pump.fun and all that. And you have institutions building on it. So my question is, how is Solana able to handle the volume of transactions, not just now, but future as there's more demand and more people come on chain?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the thing that makes Solana unique, there's kind of two main things. One is parallel execution, and this is what really helps with scalability. Currently, the theoretical throughput of the network is about 65,000 transactions per second. And there's a new upgrade to a new independent validator client is being built called Firedancer by Jump Crypto, and that has 1 million TPS, which is more than enough to handle, just 1 million concurrent transactions per second, which is more than enough for the NASDAQ of the blockchain, which was the founding vision of Solana. And then the second thing that's really important is the fees. Is how does Solana keep fees down, even amidst the scaling nature of the utilization of the network? And this is thanks to a concept called local fee markets. So on Ethereum and other EVM chains, they have this idea of global fee markets. If there's a spike in demand, all of the transaction fees for that network go up. And this is what you saw in October during the flash crash, where, it was hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to transact on Ethereum. And then, in some cases, many tens of dollars to transact on layer twos. Whereas on Solana, the median fee was still, in the cents. And normally Solana is 1,000th of a cent per transaction. And that is really imperative because it's not just about having low fees, but it's having predictably low fees. For institutions in particular that need to know, they need to be able to budget for, what things are going to cost, to know what they should charge for various products that they're building on the blockchain.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Now you being head of institutional, right, growth, that is, I'm curious, what are institutions building on Solana? Are they tokenizing money market funds, or tokenizing other types of assets? And what's the conversation been like over the past year, given the change in the regulatory environment and so forth?
Yeah, so let's start with the change in the regulatory environment. I can't say enough how important the passage of the Genius Act bill was. Obviously, we have an incredibly blockchain forward president in Donald Trump, who's done all kinds of helpful things in the administrative branch, which he controls. But what I think was particularly exciting was that the legislative branch, in kind of a bipartisan action, passed the Genius Act, which made stablecoins something that everyone has very clear guidelines on which they can build on. And that has really led, I think, to an influx of institutional interest in the blockchain. And I think the Clarity Act will only continue to accelerate that. But what are institutions doing on Solana? Well, you've got all sorts of different institutions doing different kinds of things. On the payment side, you've got the likes of Visa and MasterCard and PayPal and Stripe. Square, Cash App recently also announced that they're using Solana. PayPal. On the tokenization side, on the asset management, you've got Hamilton Lane, Brebb and Howard, Apollo on the private side. You've got, BlackRock, Van Eck, Franklin Templeton, Wellington, and others on the money fund side. You've got all sorts of commodities, gold, wine, art, even whiskey, and everything under the sun. As I mentioned when we started the podcast, all assets, same liquidity venue, global market participants, 24/7. And so we're really working to bring institutions on Solana. With all different kinds of assets. And then there's also banks are building on Solana as well. You've got Societe Generale, which has stablecoin. Fiserv recently announced that they're building stablecoins on Solana, and then you've got money transmitters like Western Union, who's building on Solana. So
Right.
the institutional utilization of Solana really runs the gamut, and I think it's increasingly being seen as a place that institutions feel incredibly comfortable building, and are increasingly choosing Solana as a first chain or only chain that they're building on.
Yeah, it's incredible adoption, and you mentioned the most recent one was Western Union looking to launch their stable coin on Solana, which is incredible. Um, when these institutions are using Solana, and this may be a question that goes for every blockchain, how are they integrating in or plugging into Solana? I'm curious about that, and maybe technical, where it may go over the heads of some folks, but I'm curious, what is the step of hitting the ground running from a conversation to hitting the ground running?
Yeah, so I would say, institutions take a few different approaches to how they build on the blockchain. It depends in part on, the level of investment that they're able to make, and also kind of how comfortable they are with new technologies. So some institutions, want to recruit and or train, current engineers that they have, and have them, do the build internally. And then others, might look to a partner, like a tokenization partner, like on the stablecoin side, that could be a Circle or a Paxos or somebody like that. Or on the tokenization side for real world assets, that could be, Securitize or Republic or Alpha Ledger or Centrifuge or somebody like that. And it really depends on how quickly they want to move. Do they want to build it in house? Do they want to maintain it in house? But I think that increasingly institutions are saying we have to have this capability. We have to be on chain. And that's really exciting to see, because once these guys move, they don't move fast, but once they move with size.
Oh, absolutely. Now, you mentioned earlier upgrades such as Firedancer. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that live or is that in the works?
So Firedancer is live partially on mainnet. There's also different versions of it that are live and being tested. Um, Firedancer will be, I think, fully live hopefully sometime next year. I'm sure we'll get an update on that next month in Abu Dhabi at our big conference Breakpoint. Tony, I hope you're joining us, and others listeners. We'd love to see you in Abu Dhabi. Lots of alpha will be shared at Breakpoint, as it always is.
That's exciting. We'll talk offline about that. I would love to attend. What are you and the team as far as your vision board, so to speak, for 2030, let's say 5 years from now, what Solana may look like with the adoption of retail applications, but also institutions?
Yeah, so I think Solana is powering the financial internet in 2030, and you may or may not even know that it is doing that, right? As a user, we want applications built on Solana to be as fast and performant as any other application, and I think you're seeing that increasingly, where people will use a DEX or they'll use peer to peer payments app, and they're just amazed that it's even blockchain underneath, because it just feels so fast, almost instantaneous. And currently, settlement for a transaction on Solana is about 400 milliseconds, but there's another new technology being built called Alpenglow, which will reduce that to about 150 milliseconds. And the reason that is so important is 200 milliseconds is the point at which a human feels something is generally instantaneous. So we're going from something that's already really, really fast to something that to the human eye will appear as nearly instantaneous. And, that's really exciting. And I think 2030, virtually every financial application on the internet will be powered on Solana.
So on that note, Nick, the transition for many companies from Web 2 to Web 3, it's in the progress, right? And there's still people who are skeptics, they're still on the fence. So I'm curious what your strategy is to approach some of these companies, like the Googles and the Facebooks and other, companies that are running primarily Web 2. And to your point, eventually people won't know Solana's powering the backend, just that it works, right? At the end of the day, the average Joe and Jane. So I'm curious, how are you? I don't know if you can reveal this, but what's your pitch to these folks? Like, hey, you need to get on here. This is what's happening. Not necessarily you have to advertise it to the end consumer, but you have to build it in your background.
Yeah, well, I think it's really simple. If you were a large institution, you wanted to be early in the cloud. You wanted to be early in mobile. You wanted to be early in social. And now I think you want to be early in blockchain. And I think it is still early. If you look at who accrued, market share, AWS cloud, Facebook, social, um, and then mobile, Apple and Google, right? And you want to be early in blockchain. I think, the Visas, the PayPals, the Squares, the Western Unions, the BlackRocks, the Franklin Templetons, these folks that are building on the blockchain now, you'll see them really, I think, benefit from that in terms of, their market performance over the coming years.
And then certainly payments has been something that's really been at the forefront of innovation when it comes to blockchain and so forth, right? But what about tracking certain things on the blockchain or putting certain data and information? How are where do you see that at? And this is a hard question to answer because it's very open ended. We got different industries operate in different ways, but do you see folks looking at beyond payments to do other things like I don't know, supply chain management, things like that?
Yeah, listen, I think blockchain has all sorts of really interesting use cases. And I think, we've seen innovation and experimentation, in lots of different utility of the blockchain. I think where it's got unequivocally clear product market fit is for financial rails, right? We've seen this with stablecoins. There's now $300+ billion of stablecoins on chain. We've seen this with RWA. There's now 30 billion plus in RWA on chain, and these numbers are growing extraordinarily fast. I'm sure we'll get to $1 trillion in stablecoins next year and $100 billion of RWA. And I think that's where there's unequivocally clear product market fit, and why you're seeing, financial institutions in particular, coming to the blockchain very, very quickly.
Now, institutions, they very much care about security and privacy, right? And not having certain data out there to the open and in the wild. So, how does Solana meet that need?
Yeah, well, so there's kind of two ways. One, there's the protocol itself, and then there's third-party applications built on top of the protocol. Okay, so the protocol itself, there's a token program that was released last year called Token Extensions, and Token Extensions has the ability to add various configuration settings to tokens that are issued on the Solana blockchain. One of those is this idea of confidential balances. And PayPal actually uses this token extension for their PYUSD stablecoin.
Mhm.
So if I send you PYUSD stablecoin, Tony, other people won't be able to see how much I sent you. They'll see that I sent you the stablecoin, but they won't be able, or they'll see that wallet A sent wallet B PYUSD, but they won't be able to see the amount that was transferred. And there's all sorts of ways also to you know, uh, make wallets difficult to identify as to who is the owner. So for example, like if you send something from Coinbase to your Phantom wallet and then something from your Phantom wallet back to Coinbase, and then you send that from Coinbase somewhere else, you won't be able to really be able to track who all that was sent to if you're looking at the public ledger. So long story short is you can use kind of the existing capabilities of the Solana protocol, to do a lot of what you're talking about with respect to confidentiality and privacy. But then there's also third-party providers like Arkiem and Umbra that are adding additional confidentiality and privacy at the application layer. And so I think you'll see both. But Solana is a public permissionless blockchain. And so by nature, all data is accessible via Block Explorer.
Oh, for sure. Like, to your point, you can see a transaction happen, but you may not know the details, right?
Right.
Yeah. Um, Talk to us a bit about bridging to, let's say, private chains, because we see some of these institutions, they have their wall garden permission private blockchains, but they want to communicate with public blockchains. What are you seeing on that front? And is it easy for them to plug into Solana?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a number of bridges that connect to private blockchains and public blockchains. I think among them are, Chainlink, Wormhole, I believe Layer Zero as well.
Mm.
So, for example, if you're looking to connect, JPMorgan connects us to Solana or to another public blockchain like Base, you can use something like Chainlink to do that.
Mm.
Of course, the private blockchain needs to allow the data to be passed, because that's the whole idea. They control, their networks. But I think you are going to see an increasing move towards interoperability. What I'm hearing is institutions, ultimately want to settle on public blockchains,
Right.
and that's where the liquidity is. And so I think that's one of the many reasons you're going to see more institutions come to Solana.
Nick, I don't know if you share these thoughts, but it's amazing to see. I don't know if the word is capitulation, but many of these institutions, they try to bypass the public blockchains for years, build their own version. JP Morgan did a private version of Ethereum Quorum or whatever they call it. But now they realize, to your point, the liquidity is on the public blockchains and they want to settle it there.
Well, in fairness to the institutions that were building on private blockchains, I think it was as much because of the lack of regulatory clarity.
Mhm.
Until January 20th of this year, crypto was a four-letter word in the United States.
Sure.
And, that has been just an absolute sea change in, what institutions can do, in the United States. They could do things, in other markets, in Switzerland and Singapore, and in some other markets as well, where there were more friendly regulators, but in the US they really couldn't. And many of the institutions that are global, of course, are also in many cases have a U.S. presence, and they didn't want to, create any issues with the SEC or OCC or whoever their regulators were. Um, but now that they, have a green light, the cars are absolutely racing around the track to build on public blockchains.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how things have changed on that front. Now, there's been a lot of demand for Solana as an asset for ETFs as well as digital asset treasury companies. Tell us a bit about those products that have been going live and how you've been interacting with those folks.
Yeah, so that's another really exciting development that, again, I think was really made possible this year thanks to friendlier regulation, specifically the SEC in in that instance. So the way that I look at it is the ETFs are ways for people to access the SOL token passively, and DATs are a way for people to access the SOL token, in more of an actively managed vehicle. And so on the ETF side, a couple weeks ago, the first ones came out for Solana. Bitwise and Grayscale were the first two to launch with staking, and then a number followed: VanEck, Canary, and Fidelity just this past week. And there's a few others that are filed, I believe Franklin Templeton, Invesco, maybe some others. And then on the DAT side, Forward Industries raised $1.65 billion to deploy into Solana and then into DeFi strategies. And there's a number of other DATs as well. The Solana Company, Soulmate, Upexi, DeFi Dev, Soul Strategies, and others. And, I think it's great that there's all these teams now that are, and large institutions like Fidelity and VanEck and Bitwise that are out there really educating the market about Solana. And I think that will only bring more and more people into the Solana ecosystem. If they invest in Solana and they haven't used the blockchain, maybe that'll drive them to, download a Fountain wallet, try it out, and really see how incredible it is, to use Solana.
Yeah, that's a great point. Those are great on ramps, great way for folks to dip their toes in the water, right, and before they plunge in. And I've heard from a few folks anecdotally that who have bought, let's say, ETFs, and they're like, yeah, I want to go see if I can set up a wallet and do some cool things, DeFi, any type of Web3 activity and things like that.
Absolutely.
Um,
By
what's
the way, I do want to mention that since the first Solana ETFs went live a few weeks ago, they have seen inflows every single trading day since. So while Bitcoin and Ethereum have had outflows to the tunes of billions of dollars, Solana has seen nothing but inflows. And I think it really shows the demand and interest in Solana, which is really exciting to see.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've been tracking some of the ETF inflows, and my friends at Bitwise looking at BSOL and all that. So yeah, it's really exciting. What's on your roadmap that you can share? I know some things might be on the wrap, but I'm curious what you got, maybe 2026 and things like that.
Yeah, so one of the things that I say all the time is it's Solana has been true to the same North Star vision since inception, which is, all assets trading 24/7 globally. Anybody can trade in a single liquidity venue, and so we're just going to keep doing it. We're just going to keep doing it. You're going to see more assets. You're going to see more applications. You're going to see more tokens, and we're going to continue to attract the best founders and builders and institutions in the world to build on Solana. Such that, in 2026 and 2027 and 2030 and beyond, there'll be more assets, more liquidity, more counterparties for you to build with together in the Solana ecosystem.
So, Nick, it's amazing to see the adoption of Solana and all the things that are happening. And, with regards to the market structure bill, I think you alluded to it earlier. Do you foresee that once that is passed into law, there may be an explosion of innovation and building on Solana, that some people might still be on the sidelines waiting for that clarity?
Yeah, I think so. I think um, every piece of legislation that moves crypto and the blockchain, kind of further into acceptance, into general acceptance, is better. But I think we also have a lot to work with, even if Clarity Act isn't passed. So I think that the big puzzle pieces are in place, thanks to the Trump administration, for institutions to build on the blockchain. Just this past week, the OCC shed light on how banks can hold, small amounts of tokens to, make transactions on the blockchain. And I think that's great. And so I think you're going to continue to see, administrative action to help clarify what institutions and others can do on the blockchain, even in the absence of the Clarity Act legislation. But I do, of course, hope we see the Clarity Act as more legislation provides even clearer guidelines and rules and a level playing field for everyone to build on. And anything that happens here domestically in the United States drives innovation everywhere else in the world forward. So, really exciting to see that the US is now leading innovation on blockchain versus, making it difficult for builders to grow their companies on the blockchain.
Mm. Now we're seeing blockchain is starting to penetrate different industries and aspects of life, and I'm curious, what do you guys see down the line? And this is a hard question to answer, right? Is it the gaming world? Is it social media? I don't know what that may be, but what do you think might be the next driver of adoption and building?
I mean, barely scratching the surface in terms of like the use case for the internet capital markets for financial assets on chain today. And so I think it's really widening the wedge that we have there. I you know there's just so much more to go. Like I said, there's only 30 billion of RWA on chain. There's something like $3+ trillion of investable assets, maybe more on Earth. So you're talking about 1% penetration at most today. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of that. As well as other use cases too. But I think that where there's clear product market fit, you'll see more and more people come in and build that out further. Such that, over the next few years, I really think you'll be able to do pretty much any financial transaction of any kind on Solana. You could pretty much do that already, but I think you'll really be able to do that increasingly over the next few years.
Oh, absolutely. Nick, I gotta ask you about the market, man. It's been brutal. We've been in a pretty big correction, and everybody's getting a little bit dismayed. What is your personal outlook? Is have we topped out? I know you're a builder, so long term, this is a blip, right? On on the screen here. But what would you say? Are we topped out, or there's more to go in 2026?
I'm a perma Tony. I'm always bullish. I think I think we're so early. It's just crazy. So I try not to pay attention to short-term movements in the market and just look at where we are today versus where we were a few years ago versus where I think we'll be in the next few years. And I think we're going to be higher.
Yeah. It seems like, crypto is certainly following the liquidity cycle as kind of like all assets on the macro. And I guess we just got to be patient. But the building continues. There's a lot of great stuff on the horizon. Um, there was a question I wanted to ask you, and it is escaping me. Okay, here we go. I'm curious if anyone is building, let's say, like digital identity on Solana that you can share. I know some things may be under
Yeah.
wraps. Mm.
So there is an initiative called the Solana Attestation Service, which makes it really easy for folks to connect identity, to their projects on Solana.
Mm.
And I believe if you Google Solana Attestation Service, there's a landing page on Solana.com where you can learn more about that.
Okay, got it. Yeah, because one of the things one of the pain points I experience, and I think a lot of people, is impersonations online and not being able to have blockchain verified social profiles. And you got scammers; they create 100 versions of you and messaging people and trying to scam people. But also, if I can have my digital identity all in one app and it's interoperable everywhere, that would make my life a lot easier, and I'm sure many people as well.
Yeah, I think we'll get going in that direction.
All right. Well, as things progress there, I'm going to have you back on to talk about it.
We should have one of my engineering colleagues who can share all the ins and outs of it.
Perfect, perfect. So Nick, I got some wrap-up questions here for you. First, if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
So I'm a big tennis player, and I this was actually pretty cool. Back in the when NFTs were really popping, the Australian Open, which is the first Grand Slam tennis tournament of the calendar year, it's in January. You could buy an NFT for the Australian Open, which was a square of the tennis court, and if the last point of the match fell on your square, they would send you the ball. But they had a watching party for the Australian Open for NFT holders in the metaverse. And I can't remember which metaverse project it was, if it was a Sandbox or another one, but I did it, and it was kind of cool. So yeah, tennis in the metaverse.
Nice. Rapid fire questions. Favorite food.
Favorite food, um, avocado.
Favorite musician or band.
Pearl Jam.
Favorite movie.
Clue.
Favorite book.
Snow Leopard by Peter Matheson.
And when you're not working at the Solana Foundation, what are you doing for fun?
I'm playing tennis or with my kids.
Nice. Nick, great stuff. Pleasure chatting with you. I'm looking forward to the future updates around Solana. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.